There are photographs from the 1950s that feel like they belong to a different country entirely. Children sprinting across wet sand in the rain, and absolutely nobody seems to mind the rain. Long queues outside hotels on seafronts painted fresh white and cream. Illuminated piers stretching out over grey water. Brass bands, candy floss. The sound of a crowd that genuinely has nowhere else it would rather be. What happened to all of it? Because if you go to these same places today, and some of them are only 2 or 3 hours from London, what you find is something else altogether. Boarded-up guest houses, piers half-eaten by rust and tide, arcades still running somehow on a Tuesday afternoon in October, almost entirely empty, seafronts that smell of chip fat and salt wind and something harder to name, a kind of stillness that isn't peaceful. This isn't a video about tourism. What happened to the British seaside town is a much stranger story than that. It's about what occurs when a whole community builds its identity, its economy, its sense of purpose around something, and then that thing just goes away. Not slowly necessarily, sometimes quite suddenly. A cheap package holiday to Mallorca, a motorway bypass, a ferry terminal that closes in a single financial year, and after that, the long silence. Each place in this list arrived at its decline by a slightly different route. That's what makes them worth looking at individually. Because once you understand what happened to them, you start to see these towns differently. Not as failures, but as evidence. Evidence of a way of life that was built, flourished, and was then very quietly discarded. And nobody much was made responsible for what was left behind. We're counting down from 10 to 1. The first entries will feel like curiosity. Places you might pass through and think, well, that's seen better days. But somewhere around the middle, something shifts. The tone changes. And by the time we reach the end, you'll understand why. Hunstanton, Norfolk, the wrong-facing beach. Hunstanton holds a small, peculiar distinction. It is the only seaside resort on the east coast of England where you can watch the sun set over the sea. Every other east coast beach faces east. The sea stretches toward the continent, and the sun goes down behind you, over fields and car parks. But Hunstanton faces west, across the Wash, toward Lincolnshire. The light in the evenings here is genuinely extraordinary. And yet, walk along the green, the long strip of grass above the beach, on a summer afternoon, and you'll find it quietly, persistently under-occupied. The amusement arcade is there. The chip shops are there. There's a miniature railway that still runs, bless it. But something about Hunstanton has never quite caught. It draws visitors from Norfolk and the Midlands, the same families coming back year after year out of habit and loyalty, and that loyalty has kept the town from outright collapse. But it hasn't brought growth either. It hasn't brought investment. The sort of slow, invisible neglect that doesn't make headlines. What Hunstanton has, and this is true of many places on this list, is a faint quality of suspension. As if it's been waiting for something to happen for about 40 years, and has now partially stopped waiting, and Hunstanton, at least, still has its sunsets. The next town on this list lost even the things it had every right to keep. Bridlington, Yorkshire. The town that keeps trying. Bridlington is, in some ways, the most poignant entry in the earlier part of this list, because Bridlington has not given up. That much is visible the moment you arrive. There are investments, a renovated harbour, a new leisure centre, an effort to brand the town as something worth visiting. The seafront has been tidied. There are signs everywhere pointing at things to do, and all of that effort only makes the underlying reality more visible, not less. Because the harder a place is trying, the more clearly you can see what it's trying to recover from. At its height, Bridlington was one of the most popular resorts in the north of England. It had theatres, a proper concert hall, a loyal working class following from West Yorkshire and South Yorkshire. Families for whom a week in Brid was as certain a part of summer as anything else. That constituency still exists. A little. But it's older now, and smaller, and the town's infrastructure was built for something 10 times its current scale. You see it in the guest houses. Streets of them, running back from the seafront. Victorian terraces that were purpose-built for visitors. Many now subdivided into flats or sitting empty with handwritten cards in the windows offering rooms by the week. This is the physical form that decline takes in a seaside town. The accommodation that was built for pleasure becomes eventually accommodation for people with nowhere else to go. Bridlington is trying. What comes next stopped trying a while ago. Folkestone, Kent. The night the ferry left the Channel Tunnel opened in 1994. The Folkestone-Boulogne ferry service closed the same year, and with it went the engine of an entire local economy. This is the thing about Folkestone that's so difficult to fully absorb. The damage was almost instantaneous. Not a slow drift, not a gradual shifting of preferences. A single infrastructure decision, to build a tunnel rather than improve the ferry, effectively ended Folkestone's primary economic function overnight. The hotels that had fed off transit trade emptied. The shops that had serviced sailors and travellers shut. The whole machinery of a port town, the cabs, the pubs near the terminal, the chandlers, the small businesses that live off the crumbs of something larger, went quiet. What followed was a long, genuinely painful 20 years. Unemployment. Empty properties along the harbour arm. A town that had once been a gateway to Europe, becoming a place people drove through on the way to the Eurotunnel terminal, which was, by a particular irony, built on the western edge of town, near Cheriton, and generated almost no economic benefit for Folkestone itself. There has been some recovery. The creative quarter, pushed largely by Roger de Haan, son of the founder of Saga, which is itself a story, has brought galleries, studios, restaurants to the old town. The harbour arm has become a destination of sorts. But this recovery exists alongside, and arguably in tension with, a residential population that was largely left out of it. The regenerated Folkestone and the left-behind Folkestone occupy the same streets, and the distance between them is significant. Folkestone was undone by one decision made elsewhere. The town after this one was undone more slowly, and perhaps more completely. Weston-super-Mare, Somerset, the Banksy problem. In the summer of 2015, Banksy opened a theme park in Weston-super-Mare. He called it Dismaland. The name was a joke, obviously. A riff on Disneyland, an art installation about consumerism and spectacle and bleakness dressed up as entertainment. But the joke landed a little differently than perhaps intended, because Weston-super-Mare actually is, in some respects, dismal. Not in a way that's funny. In a way that's very ordinary and quite serious and has been going on for a long time. Weston sits on the Bristol Channel, which has the second highest tidal range in the world. At low tide, the sea retreats so far, sometimes more than a mile, that the beach becomes an expanse of grey-brown mud. Children have been taken to Weston expecting the sea, and found, depending on the time of day, approximately no sea. This is not entirely the town's fault, but it is, you could argue, representative of a certain kind of problem. The thing the town is selling and the thing that actually exists are not always the same thing. The Grand Pier burned down in 2008. The second time in the town's history a pier has caught fire, and was rebuilt. The rebuilt pier is functional, well-maintained even, but it sits at the end of a seafront that has struggled to present itself as a destination rather than a habit. The town has its regulars, its loyalists from Bristol and the Midlands who come because they always have. But the footfall has been eroding for decades, and the high street shows it. Dismaland drew 150,000 visitors over 5 weeks. When it closed, Banksy donated the materials to build shelters for refugees in Calais. Weston went back to being Weston. The art installation is now, arguably, more famous than the town that hosted it. Weston was turned, briefly, into a metaphor for itself. What follows is a town where no artist arrived, and where the metaphor went unnoticed by anyone except the people living it. Skegness, Lincolnshire. 3 months of the year. The jolly fisherman. You'll know him even if you don't know his name. The red-cheeked, rotund fisherman leaping joyfully along a beach, arms outstretched, the slogan underneath reading, "Skegness is so bracing." He's been the mascot of this town since 1908. He is everywhere in Skegness, on mugs, on fridge magnets, on laminated menus in chip shops, on the side of a building near the seafront. He has survived everything the 20th century threw at this town, which is more than can be said for almost anything else. Skegness is an economy built around summer, and summer here lasts, generously, 3 months. The rest of the year, a significant portion of the town's businesses close entirely. Boarding houses shut their doors in September and open again at Easter, if they open at all. The amusement arcades run on skeleton staff. The seafront in January is, and there's no kind way to put this, a stark thing to walk along. The year-round population is not large, and it is not prosperous. Skegness consistently appears near the top of deprivation indices for the East Midlands. The infrastructure of the town, its roads, its housing, its services, has to support a seasonal population of hundreds of thousands while being funded by the tax base of a modest market town. And yet Skegness endures in its way. The caravan parks outside town are enormous, and they're not empty. The chip shops do extraordinary business from June through August. The jolly fisherman keeps jumping. There's something almost defiant about the place, as if it knows exactly what it is, has made its peace with that, and intends to carry on regardless. Whether that constitutes resilience or resignation is, perhaps, a matter of perspective. Skegness built a life around summer and learned to survive winter. The next town built a life around summer and forgot to survive anything else. Clacton-on-Sea, Essex, the oldest town in England. Clacton-on-Sea has for the past several years been statistically the oldest town in England. Not in the sense of history, though it has that too, but in the sense of demographics. The median age here is the highest in the country. A higher proportion of residents are over 65 than anywhere else in England. What happened is both simple and, once you understand it, unexpectedly sad. Clacton built itself as a working-class day trip and holiday destination for London's East End. Families from Hackney and Stratford and Barking came here by rail. There was a direct line from Liverpool Street, and it filled up every summer Friday night with people who had spent the week in factories and offices and market stalls. Clacton was their release. When the cheap package holiday arrived, the younger families started going elsewhere. Spain, Greece, the Canaries. But some of those families, particularly the older ones, had been coming to Clacton for 30 or 40 years. And some of them, when they retired, moved there. The place they'd spent their best summers became the place they'd spend their last years. The property was cheap. It always is when somewhere has been declining long enough. And the sea air was real, whatever else had changed. So Clacton aged. And as it aged, the services that served the young contracted. The amusement park closed, the pier entertainment shrank, the clubs went, and the services that served the elderly grew. Care homes, mobility shops, quiet streets. It is not an unhappy town exactly, but it is a town that arrived at its current shape through a process that nobody quite intended and nobody was equipped to stop. The last generation of people who loved this place for what it was moved here to keep loving it, and what they brought with them mostly was their age. Clacton became the retirement of its own golden age. What follows is a town that didn't get even that. It got something harder. Margate, Kent. The regeneration that didn't reach everyone. Margate is the most complicated story on this list. It's the one that, on the surface, looks like a success. Turner Contemporary opened in 2011. A proper art gallery, well designed, with real programming, drawing real audiences from London, only 90 minutes away by high-speed train. Around it grew a neighbourhood, the Old Town, with its independent shops and vintage dealers and cafes and weekend markets. Journalists started writing about Margate as the new Brighton, the new Shoreditch, a creative revival for a post-industrial seaside. There were features in the weekend supplements. Estate agents began circling. All of this happened, and none of it is false. But Margate is also one of the most deprived towns in the southeast of England. The wards away from the Old Town, Cliftonville, Dane Valley, parts of central Margate, have some of the highest rates of poverty, poor health, and social deprivation in Kent. The housing stock in these areas became, over the course of the 1980s and 1990s, a destination of last resort for people placed by London councils who had nowhere else to put them. Large Victorian houses were subdivided into bedsits and let at the lowest end of the market. So what you have in Margate is two towns in one body. The artsy Margate that people visit for the weekend, with its Turner prizes and its gallery restaurants and its talk of renewal, and the other Margate, where the renewal is largely invisible, where the food bank is busy, and where long-term residents describe watching their town become attractive to people who are not them. This is a specific kind of wound, not just poverty, but the experience of watching your home become desirable to others while remaining inaccessible to you. Margate got a revival. What came next got nothing. Morecambe, Lancashire. After Eric left, there is a bronze statue of Eric Morecambe on the seafront at Morecambe, posed mid-dance, one leg kicked out, arms open. It's a good statue. People come specifically to see it, to photograph themselves beside it, to do the pose. It was unveiled by the Queen in 1999, and it is, by some distance, the most visited thing in Morecambe. Eric Morecambe, born Eric Bartholomew, who took his name from his hometown, left Morecambe as a teenager to become famous. He became, by most measures, the most beloved comedian Britain produced in the 20th century. His connection to the town was real and affectionate, but it was largely symbolic by the end. He lived in Hertfordshire, he worked in London, and he died in 1984. The statue came 15 years later. By then, the town it presided over had already been hollowing out for a decade. Morecambe had been a significant resort. It drew visitors from the industrial towns of Lancashire and West Yorkshire, Bradford, Leeds, Burnley, Preston, who came partly for the sea and partly for the entertainers. There were theatres, a ballroom, a winter gardens that could seat thousands. And then, over the course of the 1970s and 1980s, it came apart. The hotels along Marine Road became, progressively, houses of multiple occupation, the kind of conversion that follows declining tourism like a shadow. The Winter Gardens, which closed in 1977, became a listed building in a state of serious structural decay that continues to this day. Millions of pounds needed, various rescue schemes proposed and collapsed, the building standing there on the seafront in a state of suspended deterioration. Walk along the promenade on a quiet evening, and Morecambe Bay itself is undeniably beautiful. Wide, shifting, the light extraordinary over the sands toward the Lake District hills. The bay didn't decline. The bay is the same as it always was. It's what was built around it that fell away. And the statue of Eric stands there at the edge of all of it, mid-dance, grinning, permanently positioned as if he's just about to tell you something funny. Morecambe lost its winter gardens and kept its statue. The two towns that follow lost things that couldn't be preserved in bronze. Rhyl, North Wales. What Liverpool left behind.
There is a woman, she's in her 70s now, who grew up in Liverpool and spent every summer of her childhood in Rhyl. She talks about it the way people talk about places that formed them. The fun fair, The Sun Centre, which had a wave machine and a subtropical pool and felt, in the 1970s, like the most advanced piece of leisure engineering in existence. Fish and chips, eaten on the prom in the rain.
The particular noise of a resort at full capacity, the machines, the music, the shouting, all of it overlapping into a kind of joy that seems, in memory, entirely uncomplicated. She went back a few years ago. She hadn't been in 30 years. She didn't stay long. Rhyl sits on the north coast of Wales, and it drew its visitors primarily from Merseyside and Greater Manchester, working-class families for whom it was the accessible sea. The Sun Centre, which opened in 1980 and was genuinely remarkable for its time, closed in 2013. The funfair, Ocean Beach, closed in 2007. The Sky Tower, which had been a landmark since 1990, was demolished in 2014. Each of these closures left a physical gap in the seafront, gaps which were, in most cases, not filled. What replaced them, or rather, what grew in the absence of anything replacing them, was a set of problems that now define Rhyl more visibly than anything it was built to be. High rates of drug-related harm, county lines activity, poverty that shows itself in every street back from the seafront, the same guest houses, the same conversion from holiday accommodation to emergency housing. But more so, further gone. There's a phrase people in Rhyl use, both with pride and with a kind of resignation, about the town being real. Not polished, not gentrified, not curated for visitors. Real. And that's true. But the reality of Rhyl, for many of the people living in it, is extremely hard. The town that gave those Liverpool families their summers became, for a different population, a place of last resort. And the distance between those two things, between what Rhyl was for and what Rhyl became, is almost too large to hold in your mind at once. Rhyl carries the weight of what it was alongside the weight of what it is. What comes last carries both of those, and something more. Porthcawl, South Wales. The King has left the building every August bank holiday. Porthcawl holds the world's largest Elvis festival. Thousands of Elvis impersonators converge on this small South Wales seaside town. Elvis in white jumpsuits, Elvis in black leather, young Elvis, old Elvis, Welsh Elvis with the accent slightly wrong, in a way that's hard to identify but immediately perceptible. They fill the pubs and the seafront and the Grand Pavilion. It is, by any measure, a committed event, and people come from across Europe to attend. The town embraces it. It has become, over 3 decades of running, the thing Porthcawl is known for. And this is the thing about Porthcawl that makes it the right place to end this list. The festival is genuinely good. People love it. It brings money and noise and life to a town that genuinely needs all three. Nobody involved is doing anything wrong. The Elvis impersonators are excellent. The atmosphere, by all accounts, is one of uncomplicated joy. But the Elvis Festival is, involuntarily, a precise symbol of what happened to the British seaside town. A celebration of someone who left. An annual ritual built around an absence. The King himself, the real one, the original energy, departed long ago, and what remains is tribute, imitation, affection, and approximation. The form without the source. Porthcawl was a proper resort. It had a fairground, Coney Beach, that operated for decades and drew families from the South Wales valleys in the tens of thousands every summer. The valleys were mining country, and Porthcawl was their sea. When the mines closed, across the 1980s, the valleys emptied economically, and the flow of visitors thinned. Coney Beach closed in 2014. The site sat empty for years, a question the town couldn't answer. What do you do with a fairground that no longer has a reason to exist? What do you do with a town that was built to serve a community that has been, through no fault of its own, disassembled? The questions don't have clean answers. And that's perhaps the point. Standing on the seafront at Porthcawl on a morning in November, the Bristol Channel grey and wide, the fairground site quiet, the Grand Pavilion's lights off, You understand something about these places that statistics don't quite reach. They are not failures. They are endings without adequate conclusions. Places where something real was built and something real was lost, and the loss was never properly acknowledged or accounted for, and the people who lived through it simply had to keep living. Every year the Elvises come back, and for one long weekend in August, Porthcawl is full again, full of people performing the memory of someone else's peak in a town performing the memory of its own. That question from the opening, what happens to a place when people stop appearing, doesn't have one answer. It has 10, at least, and each of them is different. Some places age, some places hollow out and fill with whoever needs cheap housing. Some places try to reinvent themselves and mostly fail. Some get their moment of outside attention, an art gallery, a viral installation, a bronze statue, and find that attention isn't the same as recovery. Some just carry on, stubbornly, doing the thing they were built to do, even when the audience for it has contracted to a fraction of what it once was. What connects all of them is simpler than any of that. These towns were built by working people, for working people, as the reward at the end of 50 weeks in a factory or a mine or a shop. They were not grand. They were not trying to be grand. They were trying to be somewhere that felt, for a week or a fortnight, like enough, like more than enough, like the thing you worked toward all year and finally, briefly had. When the world changed, when the flights got cheap and the mines closed and the factories followed, nobody came for these places. Nobody made a plan. The infrastructure of working-class leisure was left where it stood, aging, and the communities built around it were left to manage as they could. The piers are still there, some of them. The Jolly Fisherman is still leaping. Eric Morecambe is still mid-dance on his seafront, grinning at the bay. And somewhere in Porthcawl, someone is already ironing their white jumpsuit.